Broadcasting from the dark corners of the earth, it's Tom Mordred's Midnight Radio. Well, we're back. We're going to be continuing with the Dead Romance stream, or the Dead Romance story, once again in support of Bad Crew Theater's final days of its Indiegogo, in order to put Dead Romance on stage. What was I going to say? I feel like I gave most of the information last time. You guys probably just heard the air conditioning come on. I guess we could start with a quick recap. I think the one viewer that is here is me watching my own stream. Actually, what if I turned my stream preview off? Stream preview? No stream preview. Oh, how about stream health? There we go. Now see, now that I've turned my stream preview off, the question is it going to drop to 0 followers, or 0 viewers? Because if it does, that means that all this time that I've thought I've had at least one person watching my thing, it's actually just been me watching my own stream. Although the one viewer is sticking around, so whoever you are, one viewer, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining me, I should say. Tyler's here, but he's doing stuff. Doing stuff! Alright, so last time I was reading Dead Romance, we... See... Well, I've been streaming for 7 minutes, but I've only been recording for 2 minutes. See, I always feel like I'm rushing through everything, and not rushing through everything, taking too long with everything, and it's I don't know what to say. It's nerve-wracking. That's not the word I'm looking for. I gotta make a new radio tower. Actually, no, that sigil's okay. Oh, except I can use the M I made for Mordred. So that's what I'll do. That'll be the new update for the radio towers. I'll make a new radio tower with a new symbol, a new sigil. As much as I like that sigil, that's not the one we associate with this. Anyways, as a recap for what we have already read, actually, let's make sure the stream info is still right. Yes, good. Okay. As you can tell, I'm a very professional Twitch streamer. Alright. When we left off, Christine Summerfield was brought into the apartment of one Chris Quedge. And upon meeting Chris Quedge, she learns that her universe is nothing more than a bottle. And she learns all of this after being attacked by some kind of horrible creature. This creature is a sphinx, and the sphinxes have the long necks, and they've got the dome scary faces. Do I have a... I wonder if I can throw in a... No, maybe not. That's fine. But Quedge explains that he's he's employed by time travelers, the oldest civilization known to man. But most distressingly of all, Christine learns that her whole universe, her whole world, fits inside of a bottle, and it's quite distressing for her. But I think that's where we left off. That was the end of the first notebook. I don't know if we'll complete the full notebook in this streaming session, but we will most certainly continue on from where we left off and try to keep going. I feel like there should be like a theme song, a Dead Romance theme song. Maybe not. Do 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 do. Something ethereal and spooky. Wee Maybe just someone go. Can you go wild on a theremin? I picture a guy with like, you know how people go like crazy on the drums or guitar or something. I'm trying to imagine someone doing that on a theremin. They've got their hands about. They're just waving their hands up and down. And, anyways, all right. So both notebooks were evidently about 120 pages long. Of course, these pages are really just however long Larry Miles wants them to be. 128. But we've seen how big and small they are. Well, what should I say? What should I do? I guess I should just kind of get into it. I don't have any patter. I don't have a back and forth I can do. Well, I guess we'll just get into it. So, whoever you are, just snuggle into your cushions or your couch or your bed or your chair or whatever you're doing to pass the time, and sit back, and I will take you back into the world of dead romance. Second notebook, 128 pages, 12 missing. Notes on the Sphinx. 1. First page of a new notebook. I feel like scrawling something in big letters on the paper. This book belongs to Christine Summerfield. Or maybe a dedication. Who do you think I should dedicate it to, do you think? I'll have to think about that. 2. Where were we? Well, at about 4 o'clock in the morning on the 29th of September, 1970, I was on my hands and knees in the bathroom of Chris Quedge's flat, head down over the toilet bowl with my hands sliding around in a puddle of spilt disinfectant. I'd been trying to stick 2 fingers down my throat, but I'd bottled out, before they'd got all the way down. People aren't built to make themselves sick. Me? I never had to argue with nature like that. Oh, excuse me. Me? I never had the nerve to argue with nature like that. I'd been trying to sleep in the room where Quedge kept the spare bed, but it hadn't worked. I just lain there, with the cramp getting worse and worse in my stomach, feeling the sweat building up on the duvet. There on the bathroom floor, with the magic healing potato in my legs and a desperate need for drugs. For Valium, for anything to make all of this go away and leave me alone. I told myself that the only way to make life better was to throw up. Like I thought that shedding my stomach lining would somehow make the whole world easier to swallow. 3. Later on, when we were walking through one of the cities his employers had built, Quedge told me that he didn't understand how I could ever have believed my world was the real one. He sounded almost embarrassed, telling me that, in his universe, the real universe, things were different. The pyramids had been built by spacemen. There was life on Mars. There were lost planets inside Earth's solar system covered with the ruins of old Inca-style civilizations. Humans were meant to start taking over other planets by the end of the 20th century. There was none of that in my world. Things were a lot simpler in there. Inside the model universe the Sphinxes had made. Where you come from, the pyramids were actually built by humans, Quedge said, shaking his head in a disbelieving kind of way. That's just stupid. 4. But all that was in the future. Let's go back to the afternoon where Quedge, for whatever reason, decided to tell me the truth. Or some of it, anyways. I was sitting in the living room of the flat again, huddled up on the floor in the corner next to the window wall. The TV had been switched off, so everything was quiet, apart from the sound of tiny little hailstones spattering against the window. I was looking out at London, at Soho, trying not to notice from here it looked exactly like a world in a bottle. Quedge had bought himself a few pack of cigarettes, more to blend in with the 1970s than for any other reason. So I'd help myself to a couple. Quedge sat opposite me, on the other side of the smoke cloud, folding his big limbs into the smallest space he could. He was pretending he wasn't staring at me. We sat like that for a long, long time. He said, in the end. It took him about 5 minutes to follow that up. Are you going to be okay? He asked. I shrugged. Another long pause. Am I human? I asked, in the end. I could see Quedge squirming out of the corner of my eye. I'm not sure what you mean, he said. Am I human? Do I count as a person? I nodded at the window at all the tiny make-believe people shuffling along the street of that little bottled world. Do any of them count, or are they just... I didn't bother finishing the question. I guess Quedge would know what I meant. You sure look human, he said. That was his idea of a compliment, maybe even a chat-up line. You didn't have to tell me, did you? I said. You got involved, Quedge said. He was almost whining now. Why? Because I knew too much? Because I saw that bloody Sphinx thing, is that it? No, Quedge shook his head and waved some of the smoke out of his face. I wondered if they had cigarettes where he came from. He didn't look used to the air pollution. It's the ritual. You kind of got caught up in the ritual, that's all. 5. Quedge taught me a lot about ritual in the 2 weeks before the end. He even taught me the poem, the one he was chanting in the prison cell. I can still remember most of it. There is no light among those winding ways, etc., etc. The practice would go something like this. I'd sit in the middle of a circle, scratched into the floor of one of the spare rooms in the flat. The electricity would be turned off, so there'd be no light apart from the candles. Lady Diamond would have done the same thing, I'm sure. Then the computer parts would be laid down in patterns around me. The parts were junk. Bits and pieces of old hardware from Quedge's beloved homeworld, just there to help me focus. The Sphinxes were controlled by rituals. Well, of course. They were owned by people who were just like the priest-architects of ancient Egypt, remember? When the Sphinx had broken into Quedge's cell at the police station all those billions of years ago, Quedge must have had just enough time to scatter the computer parts around him. Props to help him fix his mind on the spell, the chanting of the poem. Quedge had chosen the poem himself. It was 19th century, he told me. All about nighttime and cities and ghosts and murder. A prayer to Jack the Ripper, or Charles Manson, or John Christie, or any other famous maniac you might want to think of. The words of the poem weren't important. The point was the Sphinx knew what it meant. Quedge called this programming the Sphinx, which was supposed to be something to do with computers. They had thousands of computers where Quedge came from, not just a handful like we had on Earth. In the cell, Quedge had managed to program the Sphinx to say where it was instead of ripping him to pieces. Sitting in that circle, staring at those pieces of junk, I started to work out what he meant when he said that I'd been caught up in the ritual. I'd distracted the Sphinx, while it had been trying to break out of its programming and attack Quedge. I'd become part of that program. It was only after it had been distracted that Quedge managed to get deeper into its internal workings and shut it down completely. Could I have done that to a Sphinx myself, after what Quedge taught me? I'd like to think so, although I never got the chance to try. I'd like to think I could squeeze into one shape I liked, the same way the Sphinx that had attacked me had squeezed itself into the shape of a modern mass murderer before it had decided that there wasn't any point in pretending. But I don't suppose I'll ever know now. 6. That's how you got rid of the Sphinx? I asked. I dropped the cigarette butt on the floor, and Quedge winced, but he didn't say anything. With the ritual, he said. Yeah. So what did you do? Make it go back to wherever it came from? Quedge looked uncomfortable again. I was getting used to that. Not exactly, he said. What do you mean, not exactly? I asked. Are you sure you want to know? No. What do you mean by not exactly? It's in one of the spare rooms, Quedge admitted. It's been there since last night. I didn't tell you before. I mean, I thought it'd freak you out. 7. It wasn't in the room with the padlock on the door, which surprised me. I remember thinking at the time, you mean whatever's in the locked room is worse than the Sphinx? Jesus Christ. Yes, I wanted to see the Sphinx again. Why? Because the Sphinx was, at the end of the day, the best proof that I had that Quedge was telling the truth. That this all wasn't part of a desperate chat-up technique, or a way of getting me into some weirdo hippie cult or other. The Children of the Bottle. It's got kind of a ring to it, I'd say. Quedge stopped at the door of one of the spare rooms, with his hand on the knob. He looked over his shoulder at me. Are you sure you want to see this? He said. Huh? I told him. So he opened the door. 8. It took me a while to fix my eyes on anything inside the room. There weren't any windows, and Quedge didn't turn on the lights. I could make out candles near the doorway. This is the room where I'd learn the rituals myself later on, but the candles weren't lit. It didn't look like there were any furnishings around, either. There was one solid wedge of light from the hallway outside, but Quedge's body blotted out most of it, so I could just see... Well, I could see something moving. I remember jumping, and all of a sudden there was the smell of something wet and leathery in the air, a deliberate kind of smell, like it had been chosen instead of being a natural animal scent. It's all right, Quedge told me. It's under control. The thing was turning to look at me, swinging its big fat head on the end of its skinny neck. The light hit the lens at the front of its skull. I saw Quedge's face reflected in the glass, all cold and blurry and yellow. Then it stretched its wings. I got the feeling I was standing in front of something huge, like a great big tidal wave rising up in front of me. Suddenly I felt very, very dizzy. I took a few steps back, and ended up stumbling against a wall. Christ, I said. Do you want me to turn on the lights? Quedge asked. God, no. The Sphinx moved its neck again. I could see the whole length of it. The shaft of light, long, grey-brown... The Sphinx moved its neck again. I could see the whole length of it in the shaft of light. Long, grey-brown, with big solid muscles stretching down under the skin. It was looking down at the floor, and in the big glass eye I could see reflections of the chalk lines scratched into the boards. It was inside a circle. The circle must have been a good 12 feet across, so every part of the Sphinx's body was stuck inside the chalk line. I got the feeling it was trying to remind Quedge about that, waiting for him to let it go. Does it do what you say? I asked. I'm not sure, said Quedge. Do you? Answer. This unit responds to appropriate stimuli, said the Sphinx. 9. No. I don't like the way that looks. It didn't talk in all capitals. It wasn't that loud. It didn't sound like it was speaking through a mouth, though. How can I put this? It was more like the thing was rebuilding the space around it. So the air in that space just happened to have the sound waves in it. Sound waves that were made of the same shape as words. If that makes any sense. Capitals just look silly. If I was better at this handwriting business and wasn't just scribbling these notes in ballpoint pen, then I'd invent a special kind of... what's the word? Typeface. That's it. God knows the Sphinxes deserved one. 10:11. Actually, I've just thought of a comparison for what the Sphinx's voice sounded like. But it's not much of a comparison that'll mean much to you. Not yet. If you're still wondering, I'll tell you now. Yes, I did go to other planets with Quedge. Planets in his universe, that is. Planets in the real universe, because nothing much was going on inside the bottle, where there were no gods, remember, and no time travelers. One of the worlds that really sticks in my mind, and God knows I remember less than you might think, is one we went to 4 or 5 days after we first met. I don't remember what the planet was called, so we'll just call it the Inside Out world. The visit was a big occasion, all arranged by Quedge's employers. I won't bother describing the planet in detail, except that it was inside out only because the people who lived there wanted it that way. It had a great big yellow sun in the middle, and all the people lived on the inside of the shell where it was warm. This was a miracle of engineering, Quedge told me, and that was kind of the problem. For years, Quedge's employers had been jealous of the people in the inside-out world, who were smarter than just about everyone else in the universe, apart from the time travelers. So Quedge's employers had a treaty with these people, which said that the people weren't allowed to invent time travel because Quedge's kind wanted some secrets of their own. Quedge was there to end that treaty, or at least to change it a bit. The ceremony was held out in the open air. If anything in the inside-out world can happen in the open air. I remember these 2 huge lines of soldiers. The honor guard Quedge's employers had sent dozens and dozens of men in armor. Except that the armor looked like it had been stitched to their bodies. Quedge walked between the 2 lines with his head held high, dressed in a big red robe which was supposed to be traditional on his home world, but which his long, gangly legs kept tripping on. He let me walk by his side. I don't know why. It's not like I had anything to do with these things. So we both marched across the grass until we reached the podium in the middle of the field. There were aliens waiting for us there, 2 of the locals. Their skins were all shiny and sweet shop colored, like aliens from the covers of crap old sci-fi magazines. Their eyes were huge. You could tell they only looked that way because they decided to. There were 2 scrolls on the podium in front of them, new copies of the treaty, covered in letters too small for anyone to read. Quedge picked up the quill they'd left there and put his signature on both copies as an official agent of the houses. Then a second signature appeared on the treaties. The planet signed on the dotted lines like the ink had just coalesced, new word of the day, out of thin air. The aliens must have been there as a witness. Even though they tried to keep staring dead ahead, you could tell the men in the honor guard were getting itchy. And who could blame them? Their employers had just signed away their monopoly on time travel. "Okay," said Quedge, with a sigh. "That's it. How long do you think it'll be before you build your first-time ship?" "We've only got a population of about 2 trillion, said a voice. "I shouldn't think we should have a working model in operation until, about lunchtime tomorrow." I didn't know where the voice had come from, and neither did the men in the honor guard, although Quedge didn't look surprised. It felt like the whole planet was talking to us, and maybe it was. Who knows? Maybe the inside-out world knew so much about its people that it even spoke for them. That was the way the Sphinx sounded as well. Like it was the air speaking, not the Sphinx itself. But the inside-out world sounded like the kind of person you wouldn't mind talking to if you'd met it in a pub. On the other hand, the Sphinxes were just machines, and they talked like machines. Quedge once said they sounded like Grell on morphine, although I don't know what he meant by that. 12. "I've been letting it squirm for a bit," said Quedge, while the Sphinx shuffled around inside the circle. It was getting kind of aggressive. I thought it needed time to calm down. The Sphinx didn't have anything to say to that. In the shadows, you could see its head bobbing up and down like it was sniffing at the architecture, looking for weak points it could slip through. "Can you kill it?" I asked. The Sphinx turned its lens towards me. I pressed my back against the wall, for no good reason. "I don't want to," Quedge said. "If I can figure out how to program it, I can use it to open up the bottle." He took a step forward. Then, probably because he didn't want to look like he was scared, "Sphinx," he said, and he sounded, for all the world, like Aladdin giving orders to his genie. "How did you get here? Did you follow me into the bottle?" The Sphinx rested its front paws on the ground, then turned into a four-legged thing again. "Reply. This unit has always been in operation within this environment. Summarization, no." You could tell that Quedge was confused, even without seeing his face. "You mean, you've always been inside this bottle?" This was my whole world Quedge was talking about, of course. I thought about reminding him of that, but I couldn't figure out how to say it. Sometimes English just isn't enough. "Clarification, yes," said the Sphinx. Quedge clicked his fingers. "Got it. You're here as a kind of monitor. You're part of the operating system of the bottle, part of the software, right?" "Reply, yes. Observation, your terminology is inadequate." "Good, great." Quedge was nodding to himself now, so his neck looked almost as long as the Sphinx's. "Are there any more like you inside the bottle?" "Reply, no." "And you wanted to kill me because—" The Sphinx didn't answer. It didn't even flap. "That was a question," Quedge pointed out. "Reply. It is the procedure of this unit to remove all alien matter from this environment," said the Sphinx. 13. Or words to that effect, anyway. You're not expecting me to be word perfect, are you? Just be thankful I've got a memory this good. I must have been made that way. Also, you'll notice that I'm still describing the Sphinx as being slippery and phallic-looking. That happens, apparently, when people come face to face with alien things for the first time. The only way your brain can deal with it is by seeing everything the way Sigmund Freud would have seen it, like it's all been dredged up from your own subconscious. I suppose that's why UFOs always used to look either tit-shaped or cigar-shaped. 14. "You're like an antibody," Quedge was rambling. "If anything from the real universe—" He gave me a funny look when he said that, so I suppose he was embarrassed. He'd reminded me that I wasn't real. "You try to kill it off." "Affirmation, yes." What about the other killings?" I asked. It was the only question I could ask that was on my level. Quedge opened his mouth to say something, but the Sphinx cut him off. "Requirement, specify other killings." I was starting to get the hang of this now, although I got the feeling Quedge would have preferred me to stay quiet. "Have there been other, alien matter things around here recently?" "Reply, yes." "Like what?" asked Quedge. "Record of relevance. This unit has recorded disturbances to the structure of this environment. Elements from the environment outside of the bottle are emergent." I remember this line exactly, because I'd never heard anyone seriously use the word emergent before. "You mean apart from me?" said Quedge. "Affirmation, yes." "Wait a minute," I said. "Forget that. Why did you kill those two other women?" "Statement of fact. This unit has killed no women." "Look, I don't think—" Quedge began. I ignored him. "You mean you haven't killed anybody in London, apart from trying to kill Quedge?" "Affirmation. This unit has not yet killed anybody." "Affirmation. This unit attempted to kill Quedge. Exposition. This unit has been recording other disturbances in this environment. These disturbances are subtle and beyond the scope of this unit's senses. The attempt to kill the unit Christine and the attempt to kill the unit Quedge were this unit's first direct actions. I looked at Quedge. Quedge looked at me. So who killed those women? I asked. The Sphinx reared up on its hind legs inside the circle. It was like it was getting restless, even if it was just supposed to be a machine with skin. Reiteration. Other disturbances to this environment have been recorded. Something's followed me in here, said Quedge. Something else has gotten into the bottle. Something the Sphinx can't get a fix on. 15. These days, I know what Quedge was worried about. I've met some of the other things in the universe and learnt about the history of intergalactic civilization, if you can call a bunch of big bangs and invasions a civilization. Quedge's employers had a lot of enemies. Even apart from the gods, there were plenty of people who had grudges against the time travelers. As far as Quedge was concerned, any one of them could have followed him into the bottle to beat his people to their safe haven. Over the next couple weeks, Quedge visited a lot of these old enemies, trying to smooth things over now his people had a bigger threat to deal with. I usually stayed in bed while he went on these missions. Once I remember him coming home, if you could call the flat inside the bottle home, with a shocked expression on his face. His features had gone all pale and hard. He told me he'd been to the home planet of one of his employer's oldest enemies, a race of machine people who, when they died, left their world littered with scraps of tin instead of bits of bone. These machine things were supposed to be the worst killers in the real universe, and you could tell it had shaken Quedge up, having to meet with them face to face. It was the thought, I suppose, that now the gods had turned up, these things were all meant to be his allies. They said my people had dealt with them before, he was muttering when he climbed back into the bed with me. We made a deal with them years ago. We even let them build time machines. I mean, it's just... I said, without opening my eyes. We didn't even keep to the deal, he said. We tried to wipe them out. Genocide. Can you believe that? But I wasn't really paying attention. 16. Yes, that's who I'll dedicate this book to. The machine people. Whatever they're doing now, this story's for them. Even if they're nothing but a bunch of mass-murdering robot things. Because the time travelers double-crossed them, and they survived anyways. Good for them. I just wish them luck when the gods try to take their planet apart. Notes on Keast, 1718. I remember having this dream back when I still dreamt about things apart from collapsing cities, dead children, big fleshy winged things, etc., etc. I used to dream about an old house. Not a real house. Not one I'd ever actually been to. A house made out of bits and pieces of all the other buildings I'd ever seen, so there were all kinds of chunks and points and spikes sticking out of the walls. The house had more floors than you could ever count, all joined together by balconies and sloping passages and spiral stairways. There were no windows, and no lights. The lit parts were just the parts the shadows hadn't closed in on yet. The whole floors of the place were walled off by the shadows. The dungeon, the libraries, and especially the rooms that belonged to the older members of the family. Oh yes, the family. This dream house was occupied, owned by one family who'd been intermarrying and interbreeding there for so long that now they were just the house's caretakers. A whole race specially bred to see to whatever needs the house had. They'd shuffle through the corridors, great dusty skeletons in rags and monocles, redecorating the house the way it wanted to be redecorated. The caretakers were different every time I had the dream, so if I'd bothered to write anything down, then I probably could have put together a whole family tree of the bone people. There was always a family resemblance, though. Sharp, pointy smiles, like the skin around their mouths had been cut away with a Stanley knife. In the beginning of the dream, I'd be trying to escape, trying to find my way through the shadows to some kind of exit, but all the time I just ended up getting higher and higher. Even though I knew the chances of finding a door to the outside got smaller every time I went up a level. By the end of the dream, everything would have changed. I'd forgotten where I was trying to get to, because, and here was the surprise Tales from the Crypt punchline, by that time I was part of the house, and I was one of the family too. I'd wake up with my fingers in my mouth, just testing to see whether my lips had been taken away. Chris Quedge never talked about his home, in the fortnight or so that I knew him. So I never found out what kind of house he had on the home world, or who he might have lived with. But every time we got anywhere near the subject, every time he said the word home, I'd start thinking about the dream, about how Quedge might have looked as one of the family. Quedge told me about the changes his employers had made to his body, those biological advantages of his, although he never went into the details. I suppose that means he was tied to his new homeworld by blood. His people were supposed to be able to bring themselves back from the dead and rebuild their bodies from scratch if they had any kind of nasty accident. So if that ever happened to Quedge, and he'd ended up with his new body built by his employers, well, that'd make him family, wouldn't it? 19. I was in the kitchen again, on my own this time. Quedge had sent me... No, Quedge had made the suggestion that I go make some toast. When I left him in the room with the captured Sphinx, he'd been staring at the ritual... He'd been starting the ritual to control the thing. He said the Sphinx would help him do what he'd come here to do, to open up the bottle to his own universe and let his employer's survival team in. Won't they be noticed? I asked. I mean, it didn't take you long to get arrested. Quedge had almost looked hurt. Everything'll be okay. They're not stupid. They can learn to fit in. We'll work something out. I guessed he'd suggested that I make toast just to get me out of his way, while he did whatever bad magic he had to do to reprogram the Sphinx. I didn't argue, although I had a weird feeling it might all turn out to be part of a great big wind-up. I had this image of Quedge and the Sphinx waiting for me to shut the door behind me, then both bursting out laughing. "You going to open the bottle?" I asked him, just before I left. "Now?" Quedge had nodded. "I've got to talk to the others. If some kind of third parties got into the bottle, we could have problems. If they turn out to be hostile... Hostile? I'd repeated. I hadn't bothered pointing out that they had already killed 2 women on the streets of London for whatever reason. That would have made me face the question of whether those people, being parts of that world, that wasn't real, actually mattered at all. And if they turn out to be hostile, Quedge had persisted, we could have a full-on war to deal with. But if worst comes to worst, I'd asked. Then it'll be the end of the world, probably, Quedge had told me, trying to sound casual again. 2021. The end of the world. Of course, back when it was just an expression. Making toast wasn't as easy as I would have hoped. Let me see if I can just... That's better. Sorry, folks. Just making myself a little more comfortable. The end of the world, of course. Back when it was an expression. Making toast wasn't as easy as I'd hoped. For a start, Quedge had a very definite place for keeping the bread, and that place was wherever I put it down last. Also, there was a muffin jammed inside the toaster, one that had gotten stuck there and never been taken out. leaving me to scrape away the mold with whatever tools I could get my hands on. I was just putting the first pieces of bread into the toaster when everything changed. There are some things you can sense, even though you can't say exactly how, like the way you can tell if a TV's set's switched on or switched off, even if the volume's down and you've got your back to it. All of a sudden, I was standing in the kitchen with my ears popping and my skin prickling and a kind of buzzing feeling in my skull. What was that? Was that the bottle opening? Or was it just the end of the world? I left the toaster to get on with its job. I headed back along the hall to the room with the Sphinx. Whatever it was that had changed, this was where it had happened. All the pressure I could feel was coming from behind that door. So I opened it. Really, I should have known better than to do something like that. The spare room was the same as it had been, only different. All the walls were in the same place, but one of them, the one on the other side of the room, looked further off than it had done. The perspective had changed, even though the architecture hadn't. The wall was suddenly at the end of the tunnel, miles in the distance, but it was still attached to the two walls on either side of it, and neither of them had grown any bigger. I'm told this is what happens when universes lock together. The Sphinx obviously wasn't bothered by it. Even Quedge looked like he was used to this kind of thing. And there was a third shape in the room, on the other side of the chalk circle. I got the feeling the man had just finished walking down the tunnel, like the wall had been shifted so far in the distance, that whole world had been squeezed into the space between here and there, and the new arrival had walked straight out of one of those worlds. That's how long it takes, I suppose, for your universe to fall to pieces and show you what's underneath. Less time than it takes to make breakfast. Faster than the speed of toast. As I found out later, the man's name was Keist. He was a friend, or at least a colleague, of Quedge's. 22-23. A word about Keist here, a word about Keist here, seeing as this is the point where he starts to matter. Like Quedge, he'd been born human, or something like it, and adopted by the time travelers who were using him as one of their off-world agents. He'd been working for them longer than Quedge had, though, and he'd had a lot more accidents. His body had rebuilt itself several times over from the inside out, and every time it had been rebuilt, it had evolved a little, with the cells working out the weak points in his genes and coming up with new twists on his normal shape. It was like his body was building up whole layers of scar tissue around his skin. High-technology scar tissue. It happened like that, apparently, when Quedge's people gave their advantages to the less advanced races like us. Quedge's employers could regenerate their cells in safety, sure that they'd always end up more or less in the same shape as before. But lesser beings had less control. The things the aliens put in their agents' blood tended to get overexcited. By the time I met Keist, he was hardly a human being at all. He looked more like a knight in armor. There were plates of hard skin across most of his body, and even though sometimes he wore great big suits over it, out of decency, he really didn't need to. His flesh was like armor now, blue-gray and smooth as a baby's backside, although little wrinkles would pop up whenever you touched it. His arms and legs were as heavy and as powerful as the rest of his body, more like tank parts than limbs. I still don't know, to this day, whether his hands really were as strong as they looked, or whether he was just wearing gauntlets. I know he could crush rocks between his pincers, but so what? That was the kind of thing you'd expect aliens to do. His head was the worst thing. The first time I saw it, I didn't know whether to jump or laugh. It looked tiny compared with the rest of his body. Like a little insect's head, welded on top of a war machine. It was a normal-size human head, of course, but the rest of him was much too big for it. His face wasn't armored, although it was thin and grey, and if the rebuilding potions inside of him as if the rebuilding potions inside of him had sucked out all of the blood and flesh he didn't need. There were studs in his neck, smaller than Frankenstein's fault, but just as noticeable, which I eventually found out acted like extra eyes, seeing kinds of light that normal eyes couldn't see. Oh, and he had hair, scraped back across his head and down the neck of his suit, but the hair looked like wire, like strands of iron, or maybe silver. If you could ignore the pale skin and the machine parks, he didn't look much older than me. He smelt like warm leather instead of machine oil. Resculpted man. I must have wondered, even on that first day, whether Quedge would look like that in the end. As it turned out, Keist had rebuilt himself only 3 times. God knows what he was going to look like in another century, so if he's still alive by then. If he really makes himself more efficient with every rebuilding, he'll probably end up looking like a big armored ball covered in weapon hatches. I think he'd like that. 24. I never got on with Keist. To him, I was a lesser being. He obviously thought he was better than me, just because he'd leave all kinds of tin toys behind when he finally died, instead of plain old ordinary bones. Once while we were in the fortress on Simia KK-98, more about that later, I went ahead and told him exactly what I thought of him. I was having a bad day, that's all. So I asked him why he thought he was so fucking great when he'd been born just the same as me. Keist snorted, like he always did when I asked any kind of question, or am I just remembering him as more obnoxious than he was? How do you know you were born? He asked. I didn't tell him the story about the screaming woman in the maternity ward. I just lied and said I could remember it all. He snorted again. The Sphinxes made your planet, he said, hissing through those stainless steel vocal cords. That means they made your whole species. Don't you know that? So, I said, how do you know you're any different? How do you know your universe isn't inside some kind of bottle? It might be like Russian dolls or something. One universe inside of the next one, and that'd make you the same as me. You don't know anything, he said, practically spitting in my face. I got worried at the time, because it was easy to imagine him spitting acid instead of plain old flob. Then he stomped off, lumbering away like an animal that wished he'd been born faster and lighter. Which he had, I suppose. With Keist, you always got the feeling he'd built up scar tissue on his personality as well as on his skin to help him cope with his new life. Incidentally, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the name of Dorian's stupid poetry book was Only Ants and Human, an evolutionary thriller. No, really. This was all supposed to be some useless metaphor about the race struggle in modern society. American society, Natch. On the grounds that ants and humans were the only animals on Earth that attacked each other because of skin color. In Dorian's world, anyway. But when I think about Keist in his armor-plated skin, specially grown to help him fight all the other people and things in the universe, no. I'll stop right there. Next thing you know, I'll be saying that Dorian might have actually been right about something. Stupid idea. 25. It made me think, what Keist said. I'd own up to that. After all, Quedge had never told me when the Sphinxes had built my universe. What I mean is, the world as I knew it, might only have been made on the 27th of September, and all my memories could have been part of the blueprint. Back at school, there was this Christian girl who used to cross her arms in the history lesson and sit at the back of the room looking upset while the teachers talked about the way cavemen used to live. As far as she was concerned, the world was only 6,000 years old. One day I asked her how she explained the dinosaurs. She must have been asked that a lot, because she had the answer straight away. God made the dinosaur bones, she said. He did it so he could test our faith. I'm starting to sympathize with her now. If she ever existed, anyways. And she's not just a made-up memory. I'm sure the Christian girl would have believed what Quedge and Keese told me about my universe, if she'd been in my shoes. Oh, I'm sure the Christian girl wouldn't have believed what Quedge and Keese told me about my universe, if she'd been in my shoes. She probably would have said they were just there to test her faith. And who's to say she would have been wrong? 26. But the first thing I heard Keese say, standing there in that half-lit room in the flat, was, "Is that the girl?" He nodded at me when he said it, with that little grey head of his. Apparently Quedge had been telling him all about me while I'd been out on the room. Paranoia, paranoia, paranoia. Yes, said Quedge, looking from Keese to me and back again. But that's not the important thing right now. Thank you, Quedge. You're right, said Keese. His voice was like metal filings biting down on tinfoil, and no, I'm not sure what I mean by that. It's not. You'd better come and see what's happening on the colony. It doesn't look like we're going to have the bottle much longer. Look, this is important, said Quedge, waving his arms like a mad thing. There's a third party here. We could be talking about the end of the whole... He tailed off. I saw his skinny blonde eyebrows crinkling up on his face. Not going to have the bottle? He asked. Keese sighed, or growled by rattling the metal flesh in his throat. He took a great big breath, so his suit stretched to bursting point. We're wasting time, he said. Quedge bit his lip. Then he looked at me again. Do you want to come? He asked. Quedge, said Keese. It was obviously meant to be a warning. She needs to know, said Quedge, not facing him. She's involved. Christine, look, I know this is hard, but I really think it'd help, you know, if you saw what's out there. It'd help you understand. All of a sudden, everybody was looking at me, the Sphinx included. How do we get out of this universe? I asked, trying to sound like I was part of this whole operation. Keese snorted, the first time I'd actually heard him do that, I think. Quedge reached out for me. It took me a while to figure out that he wanted me to take his hand. We walked down the tunnel, he said, out of the neck of the bottle. You'll probably need a coat, though. 27. There's this old movie called A Matter of Life and Death, which my parents took me to see at a cinema in Hulme when I was 14. At least, that's the way I remember things, but why believe any of my memories? The hero's killed in an aeroplane crash at the start of the film, but there's some kind of mix-up in heaven, so he gets sent straight back to Earth again. He spends a lot of the film moving between heaven and Earth, trying to convince the people in both worlds that whatever the rules say, he's got a right to be alive. Which in itself kind of strikes a chord with me. But what I remember most about the film is this. Earth was in color, because everybody knows Earth's in color, and heaven was in black and white to give it that all-important otherworldly feel, which drove me up the wall when I was 14. The way I saw it, and this is real adolescent reasoning here, heaven should be more real than Earth, not less. How could you get more colorful than color? I didn't know. But it bothered me for years afterward. These are adolescent years, which are about as short as dog years, so you can be claimed to be old enough to go into pubs even though the rest of the world thinks you're 12. And moving between my universe and Quedge's? How did that feel? You'll just have to take it from me that the walk down the tunnel was a walk between worlds as different as black and white and color, or as different as color and more than color. And all the time the cramps in my stomach were getting worse, and there was a headache coming together in my skull like the universe, the real one, wanted me to know that not only was color more colorful while I was going, but pain was more pain-like as well. I still don't know what I must look like to the people of the real universe, as someone who was born inside the bottle. Do I look like a black and white character in a color film? Or a cartoon character in the middle of a live-action scene, like that bit with the pavement pictures and Mary Poppins, only backwards? 28. You might have thought Keist was unlucky, ending up in that stupid pinhead body tank. He got a good deal, though, compared with some. Quedge's employers were happy to regenerate themselves pretty much as they liked, but they had other plans for their followers. There were special drugs, which advantaged people could take to change the way their bodies would rebuild themselves in the future. I don't know this for a fact, but it wouldn't have surprised me if Keist had been taking a little drug had been taking drugs from a little bottle marked heavy artillery. I know there were drugs like that in Quedge's bathroom. Ones without labels, so make your own guesses. Quedge's employers had war machines, too. Sorry, folks, I'm just gonna... My fucking headphones are all tangled up around me. There we go, much better. I know there were drugs like that in Quedge's bathroom, only without the labels, so make your own guesses. Quedge's employers had war machines, too. Big floating spheres like great brass orreries. Have I spelt that right? Oh, look it up. All held together with machine parts too small to believe in. You could see the insides whirring and turning whenever they bobbed across the sky, and every now and again you'd get a glimpse of the pilots through the gaps in the machinery. The pilots would be sealed inside the things for life, wired into the life support systems there and pumped full of the time traveler's drugs. When the pilots rebuilt themselves, their new bodies would fill up the cracks in like clockwork, until the spheres were a perfect crossbreeds of skin and metal. I thought that sounded cruel, although Quedge said it wasn't hard to finding people who wanted to be machines in a universe this size. Well, so much for his employer's policy of non-intervention. Keist was lucky to keep his face at all, I suppose. I'd be seeing a lot of machines like that where I was going, at the end of the tunnel. 29:30. The planet was called Simia KK-98, and apparently it was one of the few colonies Quedge's employers had bothered setting up. 10 minutes after I had arrived in the real universe, once I'd finished gawping at the bottle and Keist had finished snorting at me, I was standing in the open air and taking in a landscape that looked like the front cover of one of those acid-head adult fantasy magazines they used to sell on the top shelf in W.H. Smith's. The air was freezing, and the sky was psychedelic. There were orange, turquoise, and black stripes as far as the eye could see, a kind of aurora you never got on Earth, and it was supposed to make you hallucinate if you stared at it long enough. That's what Quedge said, anyways, but he was always a lightweight when it came to hallucinations. Under the sky there was just snow, turned blue and gold by the aurora. The Technicolor day-glow clouds were making thick ripples of shadows on the ground, so it looked like the ice was going up and down all the time. There were huge, fat animals under the surface trying to force their way up into the air. I felt sick. Later on, I found out that Simia KK-98 made people sick even if they were used to the way the real universe looked. And behind me was the one solid feature of the landscape. The building that me and Quedge and Keist had stepped out of, to join the other armored men standing on the watch outside. The building was a fortress. It looked like a big, broken tooth, pushing its way up through the ice and casting a great, spiky shadow in front of us. The stuff the building was made of looked like rock, so I thought maybe it had been camouflaged to make the people think it was a natural feature, although this was kind of spoiled by the fact that there were no real rocks here on the planet. My breath was making little clouds in front of my face, turned funny colors by the stripes in the sky. Quedge had made me put on a duffel coat and some thick trousers before we left his flat, although I don't know where he got the coat from. It smelt of cigarettes and second-hand shops, definitely not his kind of style. I pulled the coat tighter across my neck. My cheeks were starting to sting. Quedge looked straight up into the sky when we walked out of the building, which was where all his colleagues were looking. Personally, I didn't have the nerve. "Oh no," he said. I almost laughed at that. The understatement. Like it was such a small thing to say in a place as bright and dangerous as this. If I'd known what he'd been looking at, I probably would have laughed even more. Probably. "See what I mean?" Keast grunted. "What happens in the bottled isn't an issue anymore. They've come to take it back." The word "they" worried me, the way Keast had said it. So against my better judgment, I looked straight up again. I don't know why I do things like that. Notes on the siege. I've just had another route around in my rucksack, and I can't help noticing that it's a lot emptier than I thought. It was supposed to be what Quedge called a time capsule, a little cultural survival pod from London, but most of the collection's made up of souvenirs from other planets. Oh well. I found another 26th century newspaper, The Times, not the same one as the Earth, following up the gods' takeover on Della. There's a whole pull-out guide to the crisis, complete with a timeline charting all the major events from the 22nd of January 2591. Professor Bergarius of Loughborough University warns of unseen consequences of Earth's recent imperial policy, through the 18th of November 2593. Sea serpents spotted on Tyler's Folly. There are monsters in sight. There are monster sightings wherever the gods go, although I don't know whether sphinxes can swim. All the way up to the 30th of March 2596, Earth finally admits that Della's a no-go area. It's almost funny reading that. Hearing the Earth politicians talking about the gods as just another bunch of spacemen, maybe hoping to come up with some kind of political answer. The same kind of culture shock my version of Earth felt when the first alien presence went public there on the 7th of October, 1970. I think about Ted Heath, Prime Minister of Great Britain, going on television in September and talking about the state of the economy. Now think about me, standing on Simia KK-98, looking up at the sky and seeing the end of the world coming. Makes Mr. Heath look a little pathetic, doesn't it? Another thing I've pulled out of my bag is a stone paperweight, carved in the shape of a sphinx. Quedge bought it for me on a planetette called a Cygni 8.6. And there's still a little sticker on the bottom of it that says, "Guaranteed hand-carved," which means, I've been told, that it was carved by a machine with hands. I feel honored. The Sphinx is supposed to look like one of the gods' servants, the fashionable alien species in 2596. But you can tell the sculptor's never seen the real thing. It looks too solid, like the stone Sphinx in Egypt. I'm looking at the paperweight, and I'm thinking about the sphinxes in the sky over Simia KK-98. I can't see the link between the two. Just like I can't see the link between Ted Heath and Quedge's world. 32. It took me a while to work out what Keast was looking up at, because I'd never seen KK-98 before, and I didn't spot the obvious problem. The obvious problem was this. The day glow stripes in the sky were supposed to be only two colors, turquoise and orange. What I finally noticed was that the single, thick black stripe I'd seen was moving faster than the others. All the stripes moved the same way the clouds moved, but this one moved with wings. It wasn't the air at all. The black stripe was made up of bodies, thousands and thousands of them, flapping across the sky in such a tight flight path that you could hardly see the gaps. The stripe went all the way to the horizon in both directions, and the tip of the fortress very nearly scraped the bottom of it. From the ground level, you could imagine that the black band went around the planet, and that there were billions of shapes locked together in one big solid ring. None of the sphinxes looked like they were paying any attention to us, but they weren't here by accident, either. They were there so we could see them, so we could see how many of them there were. "Siege conditions," Keist said. He was getting ready for combat, just like the war machine he was. 33. Me and Quedge were the only people on Simia KK-98 who still looked human. You couldn't tell what the other armored men were, or what they'd been. Some of them were like Keist, with their heads outflanked by their bodies, but most of them seemed to have gone one step further. They'd been working for the Time Travelers so long that they didn't even have proper features. The armor had crept over their heads and smothered their faces. I wondered, in the days after the siege, whether they could still breed in the normal way, with humans or with each other. In the end, Quedge told me the reproductive system was supposed to be one of the first things to go after your body rebuilt itself. Note the words "supposed to be." We'll come back to this later. There weren't any of Quedge's employers at the fortress. They didn't like to leave their home world, and it'd be another 2 weeks before I'd see any of them face to face. When Keist looked up at the sphinxes and said those two magic words, "siege conditions," all the men outside the fortress listened, and turned to go back inside, to man the battle stations, or whatever it was they did. Not because Keist had given them an order, but because he'd been the first one to say what they'd all been thinking. Maybe he was the only one of the soldiers who was still human enough to bother saying it in words. 34. Quedge took my hand, and then led me back indoors. All of a sudden, the fortress had come alive. The armored men were taking up positions around the building, all of them knowing exactly where to go without being told. The tunnels were all the same, as far as I could tell, made of rock that looked like it had opened itself up to make way for the people instead of being burrowed out in the normal way. It was like being inside Ayer's rock, only less purple. The rock was mud-colored and ridged, so you got the feeling the walls were trying to do an impression of corrugated iron. There were streaks of black wherever you looked, seams of minerals running all through the ceilings and floors, the smell of rock and dust everywhere, dirty, heavy air. Quedge was leading me along one of the passages that ran around the outer wall, where the floor was a rough slope. So we were spiraling towards one of the higher levels as we walked. Yes, just like in the dream about the house. There were windows in the walls, one every 8 yards or so, like the windows in one of those old Robin Hood castles. Not wide enough to let much light in, but wide enough to shoot out of. There wasn't any glass in the windows, although the building managed to keep the heat in anyways. You could feel warm air all around you in the corridors, like the building was breathing in and out, sucking the atmosphere back into its lungs before anything could get out through the cracks. There were armored men in front of most of the windows by now, all of them kneeling in the exact same position. None of them were carrying guns, but who's to say what kind of weapons they might have built into their bare hands? The passage was curved, so I kept getting the feeling we were walking around in circles, passing the same frozen statue people again and again. After a while, I tripped and my hand slipped outside of Quedge's. There was a stitch in my side now, as well as a cramp in my stomach. So it felt like someone was sticking needles through the part of my body where the two pains crossed over. Quedge must have stopped, because I remember staring at his feet, at the rubbery running shoes he'd slipped on just before we'd left his flat. "Are you okay?" he asked, sounding helpless for once. "I want to die, something," I said. I didn't look up, but he was quiet for a while, so I guess he was looking around the corridor, wondering if he should ask any of the soldiers for help. "Just a bit further," he said, in the end. 35 to 36. Eventually we came to a stop in front of the window that wasn't already taken. I leant against the wall, safe in the knowledge that if I felt the need to be sick, I could always do it through the opening. Unless the building wanted to breathe that back in, as well, of course. We had a better view of the sphinxes from here. You could just about see the spaces between their bodies now, and make out the shapes of claws and tails and wingtips in the gaps. The sphinxes didn't make a sound, not that you would have heard much anyways, over the metal feet on rock noise that was ringing through the fortress. "If you just hand over the bottle," I said. There was a look of pity on Quedge's face, as if he was sorry I didn't understand more about the politics in the real universe. "Not really an option," he said. "Okay." My head was starting to click into science fiction mode, which I guessed was probably the best way of dealing with all this. I remembered the evenings I'd spent arguing with Cal, telling him exactly why I thought The Outer Limits was crap, and pointing out all the stupid loopholes in his precious Brian Aldiss novels, which I hadn't read, but I was a good guesser. "You said your people have got time machines," I said. "So there's no problem. You can go back in time and stop this happening. Somehow, you could get ready for them before they turn up." Quedge didn't actually cut me off, but the look he gave me was so sad and pitying, he might as well have done. "There are rules," he said once I'd stopped talking. "But you've got a way out of here, haven't you? A time machine or something?" Quedge bit his lip and turned back to the window. I'd realized he had his arm around me. Until now, my shoulders had been too cold to notice the body contact. "We've got a way out, yeah," he said. "Look, this is kind of hard to explain. Our travel machines. They work by taking you out of normal space-time, then putting you back somewhere else, right? Well, how can I put this? We have to kind of cut through the different layers of space to get anywhere. So, the sphinxes can mess up space. That means they can shift around the layers, tie us in knots. Basically what I'm saying is that if we try to get out of here, they could just lock our machines into a loop. As with everything, I'm quoting this from memory, so excuse me if I'm getting the technical details wrong. "It's worth a try, isn't it?" I said. "If you don't have any other way out." "No," said Quedge, not taking his eye off the sky. 37. Note the way I said that. If you don't have any other way out. Like Quedge really didn't have anything to do with me. What was I expecting? For the sphinxes to zoom down on the fortress, kill off all the armored men, but leave me standing? Call me cynical, but I don't think they'd have been likely to get me off the hook just because I've got skinny legs and a cute arse. 38. The rules of time travel were complicated, and you couldn't get them in a handy little paperback, not like the highway code. Most of it was in the blood, apparently. It wasn't what you knew, exactly. It was what was in you. I once tried asking Quedge about this while we were out shopping one day. It was 4 days after the Sphinx siege, by my reckoning, back in London. My peer group used to go on shopping expeditions to Camden every couple of months, which we used to think was a long way away. I did the same kind of thing with Quedge, although the place we went to was Cygni 8.6, which was just on the edge of Earth's empire in the 26th century. Signy 8.6 was almost completely made up of markets. It was like a little bit of Camden had been planted in the dirt there, and had spread its seeds all over the world. So wherever you looked, there were racks of clothing and second-hand music stalls, all under a sky that, for some reason, didn't have a proper sun, so you had to do your shopping by starlight. According to Quedge, it was only because the planet was so badly lit that the first traders had set up shop here, hoping to sell off second-rate merchandise that didn't look so great in the light of day. There was a reason Quedge had chosen Signy 8.6 for the shopping trip. The reason was it wouldn't be there for much longer. It was against his people's rules to warn the locals, but this was going to be the next planet to get taken over by the gods. Signy 8.6 was in the same part of space as Della, just a few short hops away on the cosmic scale. This didn't make sense to me, so I asked Quedge about it. At the time, we were standing in front of a stall that was selling novelty pets bred on one of the nearby human-run planets. There were dozens and dozens of plastic bags on the stall in front of me, full of what looked like water. I'd been expecting to see a goldfish in bags, like at fun fairs. "Liquid cats," the woman on the stall had told me. In the 26th century real universe, people had apparently tried to build machines out of liquid, computers that could store their ideas on drops of water. It had worked, more or less, but the scientists couldn't make the machines smart enough to be really useful. On the other hand, it was pretty easy to give the computers the same kind of brain power as a house pet. Some of the liquid cats had been let out of their bags as a demonstration and were lying in puddles around the stalls, sloshing around and squelching into each other. So Quedge... 39. Wait a minute, I'm getting mixed up. Let me finish telling you about me and Quedge and watching the siege. All right. We'll come back to Signy 8.6 in a minute, I promise. All right, I said. What about the bottle? We could go back inside the bottle... No good, said Quedge. Once the Sphinxes get a hold of it again, they'll come in after us. Besides, if we could get that many people inside, I wouldn't have had to... He tailed off. At first I thought it was because he'd seen something outside, something worse than the Sphinxes, but he was just thinking things through. You could go back into the bottle, Quedge said. I blinked at him. Me? You're not... I mean, you fit in there, he said, doing his best not to hurt my feelings. We could easily get one person back inside. He still wasn't looking at me. If I'd been thinking, I would have been grateful that he'd even thought about saving me, even though things were looking rough for him and his own kind. At the time, I just shrugged. Go back into the bottle? Go back home after having spent just a couple of minutes outside? I couldn't imagine living my life like that. Spending the rest of my life knowing I wasn't real, that none of my friends were real, that nothing the human race ever did really mattered. Nixon could put as many men on the moon as he liked. Charles Manson could kill off the whole of showbiz, from Bill Grundy to Elizabeth Taylor. I could spend my whole life snorting spilt coke off the floor of every public toilet in Britain. What difference would it make? It's okay, I told Quedge. I'll stick with you. 40 to 41. Right. Back to the markets on Signy 8.6. 4 days later. Quedge was getting distracted by the liquid cats, so I thought it'd be a good time to ask some tricky questions. I slid one arm inside his jacket and wrapped myself around his waist. So these rules of time travel, I said. Can I learn them? No, said Quedge. He picked up one of the bags and weighed it in his hand, feeling the cat splashing around inside. Do you want one of these? You can mix dye with them, the saleswoman told us. Have 'em any color you like. Why can't I learn? I asked Quedge. You need to have stuff done to you, he said. You mean like those drugs you keep in the bathroom? There was a kind of pained look on his face when I said that. He carefully put the bag back down on the stall. Have you been messing around with my drugs? He asked. Answer the question. It's not easy. Look, the reason my employers are so tough is because of all the things they've pumped into themselves over the years, okay? The grip on time, it's pretty much genetic. He whispered the word time so the woman at the stall wouldn't hear. I mean, humans are only built to work in 3 dimensions, you know? Your eyes, your ears, you're made for the 3D information. If you can rebuild yourselves in the right way, you can rewire your nervous system so you can see in 4 dimensions. So you can think in 4 dimensions, said Quedge, eyeing up the saleswoman to make sure she wasn't a spy. She wasn't. She was busy stroking one of her pets with what looked like a cocktail wand. That's the only way you can understand the rules. But you can time travel. You can even take me with you. Well, yeah. So you must know some of the rules. He didn't answer. Natch. If he said, well, yeah, again, he'd be admitting he wasn't as human as he wanted everyone to think. Of course, the old reproductive system still worked, which made me ask myself, was I meant to be one last fling for him before he lost his breeding power for good? So what about this place? I asked, trying another tack. You said we should come here because it won't be around for long. The woman at the stall glanced up at me when I said that, but she didn't say anything, so she must have thought I was on narcotics. But she was wrong by that stage. Why bother? I went on. You can come here wherever you like, can't you? By going back in time. Yeah, said Quedge under his breath. So I must still be thinking in 3 dimensions. I said. I turned away from the stall. Then I froze. Quedge, I said. Yeah, he said. I think I just stepped in a kitten, I told him. Help! 42. I've seen some of the things Quedge's employers make, by the way, and their statues look weird compared to the ones on Earth. Like there are patterns on them we poor sod humans can't see properly. It's only when you remember what Quedge said about thinking in 4 dimensions that you start to figure out why. The statues are made so that when they get old and fall apart, they still look artistic. Decay is all part of the design. Even the time traveler's ruins are well planned. I bet their skeletons look fantastic. 43, 44. 4 days earlier, in the sky over Simia KK-98, the Sphinxes had stopped moving. They were just hanging there, hovering with their wings flapping anyway. If I'd been 10 years younger, I probably would have tried counting them. I probably would have given up somewhere after the first 2,000. From the window you could see some of the ledges that had grown out from the side of the fortress. Great flat spikes of rocks, like those cliffs those cliffs the coyotes always falling off of in Roadrunner cartoons. There were men on the ledges, armored men, sitting on horseback. That's how I remember them, now, anyways. Like knights, perching on horses that had been covered in the same blue-gray armor plating. I can't really imagine the people in the fortress keeping horses, though, so I might be misremembering things. The shapes on the ledges definitely had 4 legs, but whether they were things being ridden, or just the agents of the houses who'd grown themselves much bigger and heavier bodies, I can't say for sure. It makes sense, I suppose, to turn yourself into a centaur. If all your weapons are built onto your body, then a bigger body can pack more firepower. There could have been a whole nuclear generators in the guts of those horse people. Even now, none of the men had opened fire. The planet was quiet, apart from the sound of the wind. The Sphinxes were staring down at the fortress, and the fortress was staring up at the Sphinxes. What are they waiting for? I asked Keist. Quedge had left me, just after our conversation about going back into the bottle. He'd spotted Keist in the tunnel and told the pinhead to look after me. Then he'd bounded away up the slope of the passage. Keist snorted, more at the Sphinxes than at me this time. They don't have to rush things. We don't even know if our defensive systems are going to scratch them. So they're trying to psych us out? Maybe. Doesn't really matter. I gave Keist a withering look. He didn't wither. 6.5-foot tall people with metal skins usually don't. So you don't care about their tactics? I thought you were supposed to be a soldier. Not a soldier, Keist snapped. And when I say snapped, I mean teeth like a man-trap snapped. This isn't an army. We're just here to keep watch on the bottle. But you still don't care about the Sphinx's tactics? I asked, sticking to the only good point I thought I had. Keist shrugged. Chunks of armor the size of dinner plates ground together around his shoulders. It doesn't make a difference what they can do. We can't fight them. So we just sit here and die, is that it? Don't be stupid, said Keist. We've sent for reinforcements. There's warships on the way from the homeworld. We've just had to hope the Sphinxes aren't smart enough to figure that out. We might get lucky. They're not built to think for themselves much. Oh, I said. Is that where Quedge went? To send for help? I sent for help, Keist grunted, while you and Quedge were busy screwing around in your world. I didn't know what to say to that, seeing as it wasn't true. Not at that point, anyway. He's got a thing about two-dimensional women, Keist added. 45. I'd like to say that I kept my dignity after that, and gave Keist a piece of my mind. I didn't, obviously. As if to prove his point, I did what any two-dimensional character would have done. I stomped off and went to find Quedge, who'd become the one thing in this world, no, in this universe, I felt I could safely cling on to. Whether I was screwing him or not. If I'd known where Quedge had actually gone after he'd left me, well, I suppose I might have thought twice. I didn't know. But he didn't give me any clues about what he was up to. He didn't say, for example, excuse me a moment, I'm just going to step out to talk to the Sphinxes, face to face. 46. It only just struck me how much this story looks like a bad LSD trip. Those of you who still think I'm on a long-term high will be wondering whether the whole thing's a hallucination. I mean, is it really a coincidence that I somehow ended up on the only psychedelic planet in the galaxy? Well, maybe that's a point. Maybe this isn't a story at all. Maybe this whole book's just a list of the states of mind I was in when I wrote it. Like a catalog of all the things I've been putting into my system. Paranoia for cocaine. Multicolored planets for acid. I'll be relaxing again soon, so you'll probably think I'm writing it on dope. Notes on the face-off. 47. It is very dry tonight, and my throat is quite worn. Actually, you know what? Notes on the face-off is a good place to take our first 1-minute break, or whatever. So, hang on. So, I will see you again in just a moment. And we are back. Alright. I think it's been going pretty quickly. I don't think I'm going to do a full 4 hours again. My throat is already starting to feel a bit rough and scratchy, so I think we're just going to do 2 hours, maybe finish up this next little section, and then we'll move right along, and we'll continue the book tomorrow. But we'll also see how I feel. If as we go through it I'm like, oh yeah, we're building up momentum, then maybe I'll continue. But it's all going to be very organic, so please don't hold me to anything. Alright. Notes on the face-off. 47. Imagine this. There's a spire, and it's made out of solid gold because the people who made it don't know about money and can get whatever materials they want from any time zone any time zone they can think of. The spire is built for traveling through space, and it looks aerodynamic even though it doesn't need to be. There aren't any fins, and there aren't any booster rockets, although the gold's been twisted into a kind of corkscrew at the nose end, where the ship has to burrow its way to wherever it's going. Now imagine you're getting closer to that spire, so that you can see the bodywork in detail, and you can see that it's not solid at all. It's like a cat's cradle of beams and arcs, all solid gold, woven together so tightly that there's no way you could untie the knots, even if you had pincer hands like Keist's. You get even closer, so you can see right into the black spaces between the slats, and they are black. Completely black. No way of seeing through the spire to the other side. You're looking at the big black heart of the ship. That's why. It's about now you start to work out how big the ship is. You're further away than you thought, and each of the gold beams is as wide as a house, so you can see blurry little figures moving about inside the framework. Figures in monks' robes that figures in robes that make them look like monks, moving up and down and in and out and left and right across the ship. So how big's that big black heart? Bigger than you can get a grip on. And it's throbbing against the gold bars, trying to get out, getting ready to bleed. You can tell, you can just tell, that one pump's going to be enough to push the ship halfway across the galaxy. And if the heart breaks, then all its power is going to be let out at once. Black lightning's going to burst over the metal, the ship's going to be the eye of the storm, and the storm's going to be big enough to tear up whole worlds. Now imagine there isn't just one of these things in front of you. There are a dozen, 100, 1,000, maybe more. That was the kind of help Keist had sent for from his employer's homeworld. That was what was on its way to Simia KK-98. Apparently. 48, 49. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept walking up the helter-skelter passages that ran through the fortress, past all the identical windows and identical soldiers, none of whom even noticed I was there, excuse me. By the way, did I mention that there weren't any female agents on the planet? Not as far as I could tell, anyway. It's funny, but I never thought about it while I was there. Eventually I found Quedge, mainly because I couldn't really have missed him. There was a space in the outer wall, an archway, where the rock had opened itself up to let the light in. There was a bust set into the wall above the arch, a carving of a man's head and shoulders, glaring down like one of those gargoyles I remember throwing stones at on the school French trip to Notre Dame. The man was wearing a crown on his head, and there was a huge collar behind his neck, with shoulder pads so big they looked like armor. It was my first sight of one of Quedge's employers. I suppose, although the face had been made out of the same rock as the passageway, so that you couldn't take... Okay. It was the first sight of one of Quedge's employers, I suppose, although the face had been made out of the same rock as the passage, so that you couldn't make out the details of the face. At the time I wondered whether Quedge's employers actually looked like that, or whether they just wanted people to think they were faceless, the same way they wanted people to think they were nameless. The ledge was a kind of pier, stretching out from the hole in the wall, ending in a point like another one of those Roadrunner cliff tops. There was no railing, nothing to stop anyone going over the edge. The archway was filled with sky, with those glowing orange and turquoise stripes. From here you couldn't see the ground. The only solid thing in sight were the sphinxes At this height, the sphinxes were just a black mass. You could see the fingers... Oh. At this height, the sphinxes weren't just a black mass. You could see the fingers clawing the air and the big glassy heads lolling backward and forward. Quedge was standing close to the end of the pier, staring up at them with his back turned to the arch. He had his hand stuffed into the pocket of his jacket. I got the feeling he was trying to look casual. The wind was blowing his little blonde hairs in all directions, and his jacket was flapping around his waist, but somehow it never managed to blow any frost through the archway. Quedge looked wrong, standing there against the shiny sky, like he was the only normal thing there, like his picture had been cut out of newspapers and pasted on the cover of one of Cal's cheap sci-fi novels. He hadn't seen me. When he'd finally said something, it wasn't me he was talking to. "Suppose you can hear me," he said, and his voice got buffeted around by the wind. I didn't know what he thought he was doing. He'd got the Sphinx to talk to him back at the flat, but only because he'd trapped it inside the circle. Here, he didn't even have any pieces of hardware to use as crucifixes. "Face to face," Quedge outed. "If, that's okay with you." The next thing I knew, there were new shapes blotting out the light from the archway. I counted about 6 of them. 6 sphinxes dropping out of their column, leaving holes in the middle of the black band. Slowly and quietly, they got into position around the ledge. The pier was surrounded. Quedge was surrounded. 6 blank faces were staring at him, some of them floating just a few feet from his body. Some of them hovering yards away. They were all focusing on him, so you could see his face reflected 6 times over in the lenses. The sphinxes kept flapping their wings, not making a sound, but other than that, they didn't move. I took a step back. So did Quedge. For a few seconds more, nothing happened. Quedge looked down at his feet, then back up at the sky, then into the big glass eye of the nearest sphinx. He cleared his throat, and the wind carried the little grunting noise straight to me. "I expect you're wondering why I've called you all here," he said. I seemed to remember the sphinxes turning to look to each other, but that would be silly, wouldn't it? "I want to talk to your leader," Quedge said. "Can I do that?" 50. There are all kinds of rumors about the place the sphinxes come from. We might as well call it Sphinx Space, which is what Quedge always called it. Who started the rumors, nobody knows, seeing as nobody's ever come back from Sphinx Space alive, except, of course, for Quedge's evil renegade. Don't you love that expression? Nobody's ever come back alive. Like the gods kept sending back dead bodies with little notes attached. Well, maybe they do. I never asked. Even though Sphinx Space has been twisted out of shape by the gods, the stories say there's still a planet in the middle of it, and on each side, hemisphere, of the planet, there sits or stands or floats a great big sphinx. These 2 huge sphinxes are supposed to be the mother and father of all sphinx kind, although the rumors are in 2 minds about whether they're actually the gods themselves or just the gods' own personal lapdogs. But all the stories say that one of these ultra sphinxes is black as a black hole, according to Professor Begarius of Loughborough University. And one of them is white, as bright as a supernova ibid, whatever ibid's supposed to mean. It made me think of that story about the white and red dragons they used to tell us at nursery school. I suppose that's the way it was with stories. You need these big contrasts. The important thing is that these sphinxes are so huge they can make the whole worlds in a blink of an eye. So huge their worshippers have started building cities under the glass of their face screens. Professor Begarius' theory says that Sphinx society is based on a stupidly complex set of rules, and that these two great big sphinxes, the kings of space, are the ones who make judgments about Sphinx law. But after what Quedge told me about the rituals, about programming the sphinxes, I've got my own ideas. If I've understood them properly, then the sphinxes are like computers, or maybe like solid versions of the programs computers run on. In which case, I think the kings of space, if they really exist, are just the bodies used by the computer's central databank, or whatever the most crucial part of a computer's programming is supposed to be called. That's what I think, anyways. And I'm the important one. 51. Quedge was always the diplomatic one among his people. That was his purpose, as far as they were concerned. I told you, didn't I? About the morning he came back from the planet of the machine people. I can't forget the way he looked then. The shock on his face. The horror of knowing who he'd been talking to. Dealing with the sphinxes with nothing compared to that. I remember how he felt that morning. The tension in him when he climbed back into bed and... God damn it. When he climbed back into bed and pressed himself up against me. When we had sex, it felt like he was doing it because he had to, not because it made him happy. Because he felt like he'd been touched by the machine people and needed to get that machineness out of him. Mechanical is pretty much the only word for what we did. Afterward, he lay next to me and talked non-stop for about an hour about the deal he had to make with the machines. I was half asleep, so all I can remember is a dream that didn't make much sense, spiced up with snatches of Quedge speak. In the voiceover of the dream, Quedge told me about the other deal his people had made with the machines, thousands of years earlier. About how his employers had let the machines invent time travel, but only a simple kind. About how they'd promised not to scoop any of the machines out of their time for their own entertainment, like they did with so many other races in the days before they knew better. And in return... No. I don't remember what the machines promised in return. All I remember is that after Quedge's visit, there was a brand new treaty signed between the two planets. All allies together against the gods. I remember Quedge telling me where he thought everything had started to go wrong. The point at which his people had really compromised their principles for the first time in thousands of years. He said, "It was that day on the ledge, when I went out to talk to the sphinxes. Fuck! What was I doing?" 52, 53. "Question, leaders," said the sphinxes. All 6 of them said it at the same time, changing the whole shape of the air around them, bending the wind into one big chorus of words. Even Quedge looked surprised at the force of it. "The ones who give you your orders," he explained. "The ones who speak for, the kings of space." It took the sphinxes a while to answer. Perhaps they were trying not to laugh. "Programming detail. All units speak for each other," they said. I don't think they were speaking in time because they were telepathic or anything like that. I got the feeling they were doing it because they were all sharing the same program. Mind you, I got the same feeling from the men in the fortress. Quedge folded his hands behind his back. "So if I talk to you now, your leaders are going to know about it. Proposition, no discussion is necessary. Statement of fact, property has been stolen. Statement of intent, property will be reclaimed." "It wasn't us who stole it, though," Quedge told them. "Statement of fact, property has been stolen." "But we don't need to do it like this," said Quedge in a pleading kind of voice that made him sound very, very little. "We don't want to fight or anything. Look, your employers, the gods out of, Sphinx space, they're renegades, right? I mean, they aren't allied with the other gods. I mean, They don't care what's happening on Della. It took the Sphinxes a while to unscramble his English. Statement. There are no renegades among God units. Secondary statement. There is only self-interest. Clarification. The God units designated Kings of Space have no interest in the activities of those God units in the region of the planet designated Della. Secondary clarification. The Kings of Space have no interest in the universe outside of the area designated Sphinx Space. Quedge went, "Ha!" and clapped his hands. The Sphinxes got a bit flustered by that, like they didn't understand the use of body language. So, you don't care about the other gods? That's what I thought. Listen, my people aren't worried about you. It's the rest of the gods we've got a problem with. That's why we wanted to keep the bottle after, we rescued it. We want to get out of the way of the other gods. We want to be left in peace, that's all. The Sphinxes all bobbed their heads, like they decided to end the conversation. Wait, said Quedge. Listen to me. All we want is the bottle. We want to put some of our people, some of our culture on Earth. I mean, the Earth inside the bottle. That's all. Can't we come to some kind of arrangement here? The Sphinxes considered this. Perhaps it just took them a while to remember what Earth was. Reply. There is nothing your units have which is of interest to our units. Suggestive secondary reply. Nothing your units would offer. There was a long pause. I got this feeling the Sphinxes were testing the water, seeing what Quedge would do. As it happened, Quedge just nodded a bit. Go on, he said. Statement of fact. The Kings have space, have a certain interest in certain fields of knowledge in which your units specialize. Specification. Time. Ah, said Quedge. He left it at that for a while. He paced across the width of the ledge, occasionally kicking at the loose chips of rock at his feet, just to watch them tumble over the edge and down to the ground. Quedge on the edge of a ledge. Now there's a mantra for you. Finally he looked up. All right, he said. Let's talk. 54. This was wrong. How did I know this was wrong? Quedge's people never, ever swapped their secrets with the other races. It was a fact of life. Something so basic it felt like I'd known it even before I'd been told. Like the house's control over space and time went so deep that one bad decision could make everyone in the universe feel ill. How much of history gets decided that way, I wonder? In my world or the real one? One of the time travelers sneezes, half a universe away, and whole wars start down on Earth. I'd like to think that this explains all the things I've lived through in London. I'd like to think that the reason I've spent so much of my life, remembered life, blowing and snorting my brains out, is that I was trying to get over the shame of Quedge's employers, trying to shake the guilt they've always had about the things they did in their past, when they were a lot more younger and a lot more careless with their time traveling. It's like original sin, I suppose. The oldest civilization suffers, so we have to suffer along with them. We have to live out their nightmares and deal with their paranoia. But I don't suppose any of this is true. I'm just trying to find excuses for everything I've ever done. All those mornings waking up sick with the taste of vomit in my mouth. All that time spent mixing space dust with cocaine for that extra adolescent buzz. And no, it doesn't work, but I had to try. I don't think I can blame Quedge's employers for everything. Or the gods, even. 55. Another conversation between me and Quedge Quedge, while we were lying on our backs looking up at the stars. How do the Sphinxes do that, though? I said. How can they just mess up the whole shape of the universe? You mean by making Sphinx space? Quedge mulled it over for a while. I don't know. Maybe it was always meant to happen that way, you know? Maybe there's something in nature that says things like the gods have got to be there. Like an appendix, I said. Another long pause from Quedge. An appendix, I said. Part of your body that doesn't really do anything except go wrong and give you a gut ache. Maybe that's what Sphinx space is. Maybe it's like the universe's appendix. Right, said Quedge. He sounded like he'd thought I'd gone a bit strange. We had a lot of conversations like that. If I've got space later on, I'll tell you Quedge's story about visiting a planet run by intelligent numbers. They were all between 17 and 18, he said. All the really complicated bits came after the decimal point. You'll laugh, believe me. 56, 57. Now, imagine this. The warship. Those twisty golden spire things I was talking about earlier are burrowing their way through space towards Simia KK-98. They used to have this story on Earth, which I never really believed, but the Great Wall of China being... They used to have this story on Earth, which I never really believed, about the Great Wall of China being the only man-made thing you could see from space. Why you should be able to see that, I don't know, seeing as it wasn't any wider than my old flat. Stick with that image for a moment. Stick with it while the warships get closer, because it's the best way of imagining what the pilots can see from up there on the other side of the atmosphere. There's a line all the way around the planet, like an equator that's been drawn out in marker pen, all black and shiny. When you get closer, the equator looks up at you. You can see billions and billions of dots of light where the sun shines glinting off the space screens. Finally, some of the dots break away from the line. They're coming. Some of the Sphinxes are coming to eat their way into the warships. Down in the clouds, the battle's already started. Those brass-colored spheres I told you about? Remember them? Spheres with pilots who've grown into the machinery. The spheres are rolling across the sky, trying to pick off the Sphinxes that are breaking out of the formation. The Sphinxes do their best to strike back, but it's not easy. The spheres and the spheres' pilots have got the blood of the time travelers in them. A pilot stretches an arm, and his sphere stretches too, right into the middle of the next week. One of the Sphinx twists space, tries to get a grip on the sphere, but the machine's already dragging itself into another time zone. This is a bad thing. The sphere pilot is halfway between one time and another, so right now only half of him is in the real world. But the Sphinx is being tugged through time with him, so the two of them are getting scrambled together, and the Sphinx's flesh is leaking into the cogs and the gears of the machine. There's one object where there's used to be two, a great black smear that gets stretched along the timeline. It must take months to unscramble a mess like that. Meanwhile, the warships are closing in, meeting up with the breakaway Sphinxes that the spheres haven't managed to deal with. One of the Sphinxes sinks its teeth into the first of the ships. Not that it's actually got teeth as such. No, don't ask about my leg, please. Space stretches. A gap opens up in the side of the ship. While the men in robes get sucked into the dark, little bubbles of flesh pop out of the hatchway of the other ships and start clustering around the damaged parts. The bubbles were probably human once, but since then they've been forced to rebuild themselves in the vacuum, so they're not held back by things like lungs anymore. These are Swiss Army knife people, who can spew out fluid that seals up hold as quickly as the Sphinxes can spew out raw space. You might be wondering how I know all of this, seeing as I was on the ground when it happened. The truth is, Quedge told me. I know he wasn't there either, but if there was one thing Quedge was good at, it was describing space battles. Besides, there are so many faulty details in this story that I didn't think you'd mind a few more distractions. 58, 59. So there was Quedge, talking to the Sphinxes about the secrets of his people, and there was me, standing in the passageway, watching history being made in front of my eyes. I felt I had to say something. I wasn't sure what. "Quedge," I tried. Quedge whipped around on his heels, almost falling off the ledge when he did. The Sphinxes stretched out their necks until my own pale, skinny, empty-looking face was staring back at me 6 times over. "Christine," Quedge said, "listen, you shouldn't—" He didn't bother finishing the last sentence. A second later, his face had gone from surprise back to serious. He turned to look at the Sphinxes again without saying another word to me. "She isn't important to you," Quedge said. "I'm the one you want to talk to. You want to know about time travel, is that it?" "Reply. These units are interested in the concept," chanted the Sphinxes. "All right," said Quedge. "Here's the deal. We get to use the bottle. We don't want all of it. We just want to be able to get to Earth and back. But the bottle still belongs to you. You can guard it if you like, as long as you never let the other gods get their hands on it. Okay?" The Sphinxes didn't answer. They were waiting to hear the other half of the deal. "I can't speak for my people," said Quedge. My employers can tell you what they've got to offer. I don't know the details. I'm not an expert. But you can have what you're after, basically." "Rejection. This deal is too vague." Was it just me, or did the Sphinxes sound angry? No, it was just me. "But this isn't the deal," said Quedge. He looked so frustrated, he was practically stamping his feet. "All I'm saying is we promise we'll make a deal. We can sort things out later. We have to stop the fighting, that's all. You can have what you want. I promise." The Sphinxes thought about this for a moment. I absolutely didn't hear them muttering among themselves, whatever I might remember now. "Question. Your units give their word that negotiations will take place with regard to supplying time technology to the kings of space?" "Yes," said Quedge. "Yes," said Quedge. He was almost screaming by now. "Just say you'll deal with us, please, before the warships get here." Even while he was saying it, things were happening. The skies were getting dark. The psychedelic stripes were fading away. Something black and heavy was forcing its way through the clouds from the other side of the atmosphere. From where I was standing, I could see the side of Quedge's face. I could see him look up at the sky with his mouth dropping open, like he wanted to tell the Sphinxes to hurry up and make the decision, but thought he'd sound stupid saying it. "Decision. The conditions are acceptable," the Sphinxes said. Then, and only then, they swiveled their necks to watch what was happening above them. Notes on afterwards. Actually, how long does this go? We'll do one more we'll do one more section, and then I think I'm going to call it. Actually, you know what? This is the perfect place to stop. A notes section, in my opinion, is often the best place to start. We're also about halfway through at 60, so that's great. The truth is, I don't think I can keep my voice going for another 2 hours, so which is about how long we're probably going to need to get to the next chapter. They all seem to be paced out pretty similarly. So again, I ask that you have a look at our Midnite Radio, or sorry, not Midnite Radio, our indie theater project that I'm working on. We're still in the last days of our Indiegogo. Once again, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's probably been over for a little while now. Might not be, but please check that out. And if you can, feel free to donate. Everyone who donates will have their name in the program, regardless of how much they contribute. So that's all we can offer you, really. But Dead Romance will be coming out in the first week of April, and, well, I don't know if it's going to go on the screen hole, but at the very least I will be talking about it pretty consistently. I'm going to stop recording.